Welcome back to Custom Cones USA. We are the pre-roll experts. Today I'm going to teach you how to successfully scale and manufacture pre-rolls through the trends of 2023. Today we're going to go over an overview of market trends in general, the different types of pre-rolls, sizes, and customization options, the main production steps and the key machines you'll use in your manufacturing process, how to scale each of those processes, and then finally, what makes an actually good pre-roll. So this chart will show you sales growth year over year from November 2021 through November of 2022. So overall, US sales were actually down 1% year over year during this time, and Canadian sales ended up just 7% year over year, despite the up and down nature you'll see in this chart. So the reason we suspect there is this decline year over year is the post-normalization after COVID. So during COVID in 2020, consumers were left at home, not only had more time to consume cannabis, but many consumers reported spending their stimulus checks at dispensaries, which gave them more disposable income to spend on cannabis purchases. So now that the world is returning more to normal, we see that the average shopper has one, less disposable income, and two, now that more consumers are not working from home, but rather returning to the office. So to dig a little bit deeper, we can now see which states or provinces are driving this growth or decline year over year. You could see in Canada, nearly every province was up year over year, except for Ontario, which was actually flat with 0% growth. Ontario is the biggest province in all of Canada, but the strong growth in the other provinces helped boost Canada's sales 7% year over year. On the other hand, in the United States, you see some states surging like Michigan with 32% growth year over year, and many other states declining with between 4, 5, 7, and even up to 13% decreases year over year. The trends we typically see in the US are the newer states that have more recently legalized or implemented medical cannabis sales have the strongest growth. You could see Michigan is growing extremely fast at 32% year over year, and the other newer states that are really growing as well are Florida, Illinois, and Massachusetts. On the other hand, the states that have been legal the longest, such as Washington, Oregon, California, and Colorado, these states are seeing some declines. And a lot of this is just due to the market maturing, and then some sales are still going to the legacy market. So as we continue to drill down, we can now look at the specific product categories that are driving the growth or declines in the cannabis market overall. So you can see here that pre-rolls are the fastest growing segment year over year in both the United States and in Canada. In the US, pre-rolls were the fastest growing segment with 12% growth year over year. And in Canada, this number was 38% year over year. In addition to pre-rolls, the other main categories that are growing are vape pens, edibles, and beverages. On the other hand, the categories seeing the biggest declines is what I like to call wellness categories, such as topicals, sublinguals, tinctures, and capsules. You can see even flower sales are declining, and this is because consumers are shifting their spend on flower into more convenient product formats, such as pre-rolls and vape pens, which are ready to go as soon as you leave the store. So the big theme that we see here is consumers are shifting their purchasing away from flower and into more convenience-driven formats, such as pre-rolls and vapes. And then these health and wellness categories, which would be topicals, tinctures, sublinguals, and capsules, are really not that popular amongst consumers. Not only do these categories make up typically less than 1% of all cannabis sales in a given state, but these categories are also the ones seeing the biggest declines. So if you're an existing operator and you're thinking where to expand your product mix, definitely think pre-rolls and vape pens. Or if you're a new entrant into the market, really take a close look at this data and focus your energy on the product categories that are really performing and growing well. So it's not only important to think about what categories your business should be playing in, but also where you can make money and survive as a business. You can see from this chart that pre-rolls have the least amount of price compression in the US, with pre-roll prices only dipping 11% year over year, whereas all the other major categories have much wider decreases in terms of the price of an average gram of their product. On the other hand, you can see a bit of an anomaly where in Canada, the average price of a pre-roll actually went up. Now, the reason that you see the increase in the equivalized price, which is the price per standard gram, so this takes into account larger pack sizes or larger and smaller weights of a particular product like a pre-roll multi-pack. And the reason that there's this increase in the average price in Canada is due to the fact of the explosion of popularity of infused pre-rolls. So Health Canada is very strict, and they did not allow the production and sale of infused pre-rolls in Canada for quite some time, but these were legalized during 2022. And they've exploded in popularity across the country. So much of the growth you see in Canada, both in terms of sales and in the average price, is attributed to infused pre-rolls, which are becoming more and more popular. And they're not only popular in Canada, but they're extremely popular here in the US as well. So the main reason we see these declines across all major categories is just because the fact that flower is decreasing in price overall. So as more farmers enter the legal cannabis market, the wholesale cost of flower is being pushed down just due to the huge amount of supply in the marketplace. And as the cost of flower goes down, manufacturers are able to create all of these products at a cheaper price point. So these decreases in the price of all of these major categories isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is something you need to take into account so you could budget how much you could spend per product and estimate what the retail and wholesale costs are going to be for all of your products. So we already went over what were the categories that were growing or declining the fastest in both the US and Canada, but you could dig in even deeper and see what subcategories are driving this growth. So you could see here pre-rolls growing in Canada at over 1,400%. And again, this is because they were previously illegal per Health Canada guidance, so now they've been exploding in popularity. In the US, infused pre-rolls were technically the third fastest growing segment with 22% year-over-year growth, and the number one fastest growing subcategory in the US was mixed strain pre-rolls at 63%, with the all-in-one disposable vape pens coming in right behind with 60% growth year-over-year. And then looking back at Canada, these mixed strain pre-rolls were growing 440% year-over-year growth, with those all-in-one disposable vape pens growing at 160% year-over-year. So again, you can see the main trend here is that these convenience-driven, easy-to-consume formats are the one driving the most growth. Again, that's infused pre-rolls, mixed strain pre-rolls, and then those very convenient all-in-one disposable vape pens. One hypothesis to why these mixed strain pre-rolls are growing so fast is because they're much easier for farmers and producer processors to create pre-rolls when they're not relying on just one strain. And then especially as the wholesale price of cannabis has been decreasing, this gives farmers the ability to purchase flower on the wholesale market and potentially create blends and mixed strains to create the most affordable price pre-rolls, still with high quality flower product. Additionally, manufacturers that are using fully automated pre-roll machines often need to mix blends of flower together to create the right particle size and stickiness to ensure that these automated machines are operating seamlessly and efficiently. So if you're not sure what an infused or connoisseur style pre-roll is, I'll tell you a little bit more now. So as you can see, infused or connoisseur style pre-rolls are the main category that's driving much of the growth, across the US and Canada. So let's just explain what exactly is an infused or connoisseur style pre-roll. So the term connoisseur is used by Headset to capture all sorts of infused pre-rolls. And then when you look at the category of infused pre-rolls, there's many different types. So on the left, you could see the really popular Jeter style pre-rolls. These are infused by painting a thin layer of THC oil on the outside of the pre-roll and are then coated in keef, which is the trichomes that are extracted from the cannabis flower through sifting. However, you could also infuse pre-rolls by putting the concentrate inside of the pre-roll. In the middle, we have an illustration of the way you can infuse a pre-roll by putting a rod of oil into the center. This is actually done using an automated infused pre-roll machine. This is something that we offer, so if you have any questions and are looking to scale your infused pre-roll production process, definitely call, live chat, or email us, and we can help scale your production from hundreds of pre-rolls a day to thousands and thousands of pre-rolls per shift. Then there's the Cannagar style infused pre-roll. A Cannagar is a really tightly compacted blunt type of product where the cannabis is compacted around a core, and these are often also infused with oil. And then we have some other premium filter tip options like glass tip and wood tips, which don't necessarily mean these products are infused, but when you do see a pre-roll with a special filter tip, they often are infused with cannabis in the inside, and this could be done with a variety of concentrates such as just the keef, bubble hash, distillate, or even hash rosin. So now we'll go over the basic shapes and sizes of pre-rolls. So when it comes to pre-rolls, there's two main shapes, either the tapered cone shape or the straight tube style pre-roll. The cones come in a variety of sizes, but there's 5 main sizes. The 109mm king size pre-roll, which typically holds 1 gram, but some companies can fit 1.25 grams of flour in there, depending on how finely they grind and dry their material. Then there's a 98mm size, which typically holds 0.7 grams, but again, some companies grind and dry their material a little bit finer and they could fit 1 gram in here. Then there's the 98mm reefer or slim size, which is the same height as the standard 98, but this one's much skinnier. So instead of holding 0.7, these hold 0.5 grams. And the reason you'd use this if you want a longer and skinnier half-gram pre-roll, some companies think that the 84mm, which is the next size, is too short. It just doesn't convey the amount of product or price point they're trying to convey, so they want a longer, thinner style pre-roll. But the 84mm half-gram, which also is referred to as 1 1/4, is the most popular half-gram format. And again, these hold a half gram of flour. And then lastly, we have the new mini size pre-roll, which are often referred to as dog walkers. These are 70 millimeters in height and are designed to hold 0.25 to 0.35 of flower. When it comes to tube style pre-rolls, the size and shape that most resembles a cigarette is 84 millimeters, and this typically holds half gram. And then there are taller sizes such as a 98 millimeter or 109 millimeter tube. At Custom Cones USA, we offer multiple types of cones and tubes with varying tips. So in the tube style, we have a 1 and 2 gram standard size. The 1 gram is 9 millimeters, where the 2 gram is 11 millimeters in diameter. And these are available with spiral paper tips, wood tips, glass tips, and even ceramic filter tips. The cones are also available with these premium filter tips as well. Like I mentioned, spiral paper, glass, wood, and ceramic. So now that we've gone over the basic sizes of cones, we can go over the most popular paper and blunt wrap option. So when it comes to rolling paper, there's really 3 main options: refined white paper, a natural brown paper, and hemp rolling paper. There's a lot of misconceptions about the white paper. You'll often hear white paper referred to as rice paper, or you'll hear people say that it's bleached or has chlorine in it. And in fact, all of these is misinformation or marketing gimmick. So there's no such thing as rice paper. And if you actually look at your favorite brand of what used to be called the rice paper, you'll see on their website a small asterisk where they no longer claim the paper is made from rice. Really, this white paper is made from wood pulp, which is not as sexy as the term rice paper. But at the end of the day, it's made from a highly, highly refined wood pulp paper cellulose. And this is the best paper option as it has the least amount of plant components in it. What makes the brown and hemp paper have the brown or tan color is the refining process is actually cut a little bit short, leaving a couple extra plant components in the paper, which gives it that natural brown or tan color. When it comes to smoking cannabis, you want as little paper material in your pre-roll as possible. So these extra plant components that are left behind in the brown and hemp paper actually add a little bit of flavor to your joint, and cannabis consumers don't want any extra flavor as they just want to taste the pure flavor of their flower. Besides rolling papers, there's a bunch of different types of hemp wraps. So at Custom Cones USA, we have 2 main types of hemp wrap. We have our classic hemp wrap, and then a new type of hemp wrap called the hybrid hemp wrap. So the classic hemp wrap is the type of hemp wrap you know and love if you've been purchasing hemp wraps from gas stations or dispensaries. This is the same type of hemp wrap from your popular brands that you've been purchasing. And you may notice that sometimes these hemp wraps will dry out relatively quickly and have the ability to crack when you're manipulating it and rolling it. On the other hand, hybrid hemp wrap was developed to solve this problem for cannabis manufacturers, where during joint manufacturing, the classic hemp wrap was cracking. Hybrid hemp wrap is made with more paper fiber, specifically hemp fiber, which gives it more strength and makes it less prone to drying out and cracking. For the hybrid hemp wrap, we have 3 main colors: a green, a light brown, and a dark brown. And the classic hemp wrap is only available in 1 color, brown. So these hemp wraps are made from all natural hemp, but we do have other options, which we call our botanical hemp wraps. And the most popular option is the goji berry wrap, which is a beautiful orange color and is made from all natural goji berries. All of these are nicotine free, so they're perfectly legal to sell in dispensaries. And they're great for consumers who are looking for either a slower burning, more fuller flavor, or just a different type of pre-roll to mix up throughout the week. So of course, here at Custom Cones USA, we can customize your pre-roll and put your logo on it. But if you're not quite ready for full custom branding, we do have a ton of other options that will get you going and help distinguish your brand. For example, we have holiday themed cones, such as Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Hanukkah, where there's a pre-printed holiday theme on the filter tip. So these are great for you to create seasonal SKUs. You don't have to keep anything in stock. We ship these out of our warehouse same day. So you could just match these with the proper color packaging, create a custom label, and then boom, you have a perfect seasonal SKU. We also have color tip cones, which come in red, orange, yellow, green, blue, black, and pink. And these are perfect if one of those particular colors happens to match your brand. You could just use that plain tip cone. Or many companies use these to create multi-packs. Well, they'll take a different color and they'll label it on their packaging. For example, red is this strain, blue is this strain, green's a different strain, and that gives you the flexibility to create multi-packs. And that helps you create multi-packs on the fly. You don't need forecasting to know which strains you're gonna put in which cones. Having it be color-coded lets you switch it up, and then you just custom print that label or a little card to put in your multi-pack to tell the consumer which color matches up to which strain you have at that time. We also have some charity-themed pre-rolls. So we have 3 main ones. The Pride Cone, which has a rainbow filter tip where we donate to an LGBTQ+ charity. We have a breast cancer themed pre-roll cone that has a pink filter tip with the pink ribbon on it. And then a new one we have is the USA flag cone that we donate to cannabis and veterans related charities. In addition to these, we also do have indica hybrid sativa branded cones. So these are color coordinated, green, purple, and red, and then also say indica, hybrid, or sativa on them. These are perfect for creating multi-packs as well, and then helps you distinguish what type of cannabis might be in there. And then we're also coming out with an infused crutch. So if you're coming out with an infused pre-roll, it would be labeled infused on the filter as well. When it comes to custom branding, we could do a full external wrap, which is a sticker on the outside of the pre-roll covering the full crutch, or we could do a cigar band, which could feature a die-cut emblem in the middle with your logo. And then premium filter upgrades, like I mentioned before, are glass, wood, and ceramic filter tips. And then any of these could be custom colored, custom sized, and even printed on to really distinguish your brand and create a unique pre-roll product. So now we're gonna get into a little pre-roll manufacturing 101. I'm gonna teach you about all the main steps of a pre-roll manufacturing process, the key variables to consider, and then how to scale each of these steps of the manufacturing process. So first, it all starts with the grind. Once you've put all that hard work into growing your cannabis and then curing it, you could ruin it all if you don't properly grind your material. Some companies try to start off cheap and use blenders or food processors to grind their cannabis, and this is the worst thing you could possibly do, especially if you're trying to create a high quality pre-roll product with your flower. So it's important to consider the RPM, the rotations per minute, as well as the torque of your grinding device. A blender or a food processor has a really high RPM, but really low torque, which means it spins around really fast, but doesn't have a lot of power behind it. Whereas a proper cannabis mill is gonna have a high torque, but a lower RPM. What's important here is how much heat is generated and the quality of the grind you're going to get. So a food processor or a blender with a high RPM spins around really fast, and that process is gonna generate a lot of friction and then therefore heat as it grinds your material. Whereas a cannabis mill or grinder that has a lower RPM but higher torque moves slow and steady but with a lot of force, and that's gonna grind up your material just as well but not generate heat during that grinding process. By generating heat, you're not only degrading terpenes, which is where the smell and the flavor of your cannabis comes from, but you're also potentially degrading the quality of the cannabinoids and turning your THC into other minor cannabinoids. At Custom Cones USA, we have a grinder that we call the industrial grinder, which is made from stainless steel and features that high torque and low RPM grinding system. Best of all, it has interchangeable screens, which lets you adjust the particle size that you're looking for when grinding your material. That's another issue that blenders and food processors or even shredder style grinders have, is that there's little to no control over the particle size. You'll notice that if you're using a blender, food processor, or even a shredder, you have the propensity to turn your cannabis into a fine powder if you just leave it in there for 1 to 2 seconds too long. And you'll see there's a huge range between really small pieces of dust, nicely ground cannabis flower, and then much larger chunks. With the industrial cannabis grinder, the cannabis is ground through a particle screen, so only particles that are at least that size or smaller will fall through into the grinding receptacle. So another thing that's important to consider is, are you grinding your stems up into the material? So if you totally pulverize your stems and include those into your ground flower mix, those stems are gonna be much harsher and offer no potency. So it's gonna reduce the overall potency of the product, and it's also gonna burn harsh, which creates an irritation in the back of the throat and doesn't taste good to a pre-roll smoker. With the industrial cannabis grinder, since it's grinding through a particle size screen, those stems remain relatively unground, and you'll be able to easily sift those off during a secondary sifting process. Whereas if you're using a shredder or a food processor or a blender, those stems are going to be completely obliterated and most likely will be difficult, if not impossible, to remove during a secondary sifting process. Moreover, if you do leave stems into your pre-roll mix, they have the propensity to poke holes in the side of the paper when you're making the pre-rolls, and that's going to lead to more wastage, a lower efficiency in the entire pre-roll manufacturing process, and thus increase your average labor cost per pre-roll. Another important factor to consider when looking at what cannabis grinder you're going to use is whether or not it's continuous or non-continuous. So a continuous grinder gives you the ability to keep grinding material without opening and closing or starting and stopping the machine. With the industrial cannabis grinder, there's a down stem where you can keep putting flour into the machine without turning it on or off or starting and stopping the grinding process. On the other hand, with shredder style grinders or blenders, you're gonna have to stop the machine, empty out your ground material before then filling it with new flour, and then grinding it again, stopping it, dumping it out, and going back and forth, back and forth. This doesn't sound like too much, but over the course of an 8-hour shift, this starting and stopping is gonna drastically reduce the efficiency of your grinding process. So through the grinding process, you're breaking down that flour, opening up trichromes, which is where the resinous oils are mostly contained. So once you've ground your material, it is a really good idea to store that ground flour and essentially let it cure again for just at least a few days. Those oils will reabsorb back into the flour material, and this will allow your ground flour mix to be less sticky and more freely flow through each of the machines during the next steps of the manufacturing process. Additionally, you should grind and process all of your pre-rolls in as cold of a room as possible. The colder the room, the more solid the oils will be within your ground flour mix, and thus will prevent the oils from sticking and gunking up your machines as much as possible. A colder room will decrease the viscosity of an oil, which means it'll harden more, and that's essentially what makes your flour less sticky during a manufacturing process. So now let's think about how we could scale up the grinding process. So the first and easiest thing you could do is just buy some extra spare parts. For example, by getting an extra set of blades, now there's no downtime during cleaning. Just pop out the dirty blades and you have a clean set ready to go. And while those are processing or at the end of the shift, you can clean the other blades. Additionally, you might want the grinder housing or other spare parts that might get dirty during the manufacturing process to have spares so that you never have any downtime in terms of cleaning the different parts of your grinder. There's also a downshoot attachment, which lets you grind directly into a 55-gallon drum or any other larger vessel if the small container that comes with the grinder is not big enough for your needs. Then the next best way to scale your grinding process is to get multiple grinders. So some people might think that you need a bigger and bigger grinder to increase the capacity of your pre-roll manufacturing process, but in fact, by having multiple smaller grinders, you may increase your efficiency even more. So one industrial cannabis grinder can grind about 1 pound per minute, which is about 60 pounds per hour. If you need to increase the amount of cannabis you're grinding, you could simply buy one other cannabis grinder and run them both simultaneously, which is really helpful if you're doing more than one strain in a specific shift. Each time you run a different strain, you're gonna wanna thoroughly clean the grinder to ensure there's no cross-contamination and be 100% compliant. Additionally, if your manufacturing is spread out, by having multiple smaller grinders, you're able to locate and move those throughout your facility as needed. So if the industrial cannabis grinder does about 1 pound per minute, and that's 60 pounds per hour, over an 8-hour shift, that's about 480 pounds. So let's assume some downtime. You might be around 400 to 420 pounds in an 8-hour shift. If that's still not enough for you, again, I recommend buying a second grinder, and you could easily double that, if not a third grinder. If, however, you're looking to scale your grinding to way beyond 1,000 pounds in an 8-hour shift, we do offer larger grinders that could easily grind hundreds of pounds per hour. Additionally, there are automated grinders which could be hooked up to your automated pre-roll machine, which automatically grind and then transfer the flour into the hopper of your automated pre-roll machine. The main benefit here is reducing human contact. You don't only want to reduce the human contact to save on labor costs. This is more of a compliance and contamination issue. So the least amount of touch points you have during a manufacturing process, the least amounts of instances that you could potentially have contamination. We offer fully automated setups that could take a predetermined amount of cannabis, feed it into a grinder, and once that's ground, convey it into your automated pre-roll machine at a set specified duration, so there's no human contact at all until that pre-roll is fully finished. So the next step of the pre-roll manufacturing process could be viewed as optional, but it's strongly recommended, and that process is sifting. So by sifting your cannabis flour, you're able to remove stems, which again are going to reduce potency, increase harshness, and then potentially poke holes in the pre-roll cones during the manufacturing process. But also by sifting, you're going to get a more uniform particle size in the ground material, which helps in a variety of different ways. So by using a sifter, you're going to tighten the range of particle size within your ground flour. By doing this, you're going to create a higher quality pre-roll for a couple different reasons. If all the particles are more uniform within your pre-roll, you're gonna have a more even burn rate. Think about if you had some small dust-sized particles, medium-sized particles, and then some super big chunky particles that didn't quite get broken up in your blender or food processor. These are all gonna burn at different rates. And if they're mixed into the pre-roll unevenly, certain areas are gonna burn faster than others. That's how canoeing can happen in your pre-roll. Additionally, we've seen studies from the pharmaceutical industry that show that a more uniform particle size helps the flowability of these materials. So for example, if you have a more uniform particle size, the flour is going to flow through your pre-roll machine much more evenly than if you had a wide range of particle sizes, which leads to these particles clumping up or agglomerating during the next steps of your manufacturing process. So sifting your cannabis is also going to help you get a more uniform weight in your pre-roll. You'll probably notice with king cone or knockbox style machines, they're not perfectly weighing out each pre-roll, Rather, they use a volumetric filling system to estimate the volume of the cannabis that you're putting into each pre-roll. So by sifting your flower, you're getting a more uniform particle size, and thus when you fill the metering tray, you're gonna get a more equal amount of flower in each of those holes in the metering tray. Again, think back if you had some big chunks and some small chunks, and then you try to fill a metering tray, you're not gonna get the same volume of cannabis into each one of these holes. So the way sifter screens work is usually by micron size. There is a conversion chart which shows you which micron equals what size millimeter, so you could understand what size holes these are. But generally, we recommend a 10, 12, or 14 micron screen for sifting your ground flower, and then 80, 100, 120, or 140 for sifting keef for infused pre-roll production. So now, how do you scale your sifting process? We've seen smaller farms sift by hand, so they'll either buy a sifting screen and hand sift it over a bucket, or we've even seen farms go to Home Depot and pick up some sort of mesh screen, staple it onto a frame, and then sift by hand. So you could definitely start by hand, and then the next best step is to get an electronic sifter, which you could just plug in, turn on, and then let the vibration do the rest for you. To continue scaling up, you could of course get a larger sifter, or just like the grinder, get multiple smaller sifters. This will help you sift through multiple strains at a time, or potentially have sifting in different areas of your manufacturing process if you do have things spread out. And then the last step you could do is inline sifting, which is to have your grinder directly hooked up into the sifter. So as the ground flower goes out of the grinder, it automatically goes into the sifter, and then that sifted material falls into the bucket or receptacle that's gonna be holding that. And then the last step is of course making that pre-roll. So there's a variety of machines that you could use to manufacture a pre-roll, starting out with non-electric versions up to electric tabletop versions, larger electric machines, and then fully automated pre-roll machines. So we'll go through all the main considerations. So let's get into the main considerations that you're gonna wanna think about when choosing a pre-roll machine. So the first misconception is that a bigger machine is always gonna be better. So this is not necessarily the case. There's something that we call the number of holes fallacy, where some pre-roll manufacturers think that the more holes on the machine equals the more output you're gonna get at the end of the day. And this is not necessarily the case. You're gonna wanna think about the cycle time of each step during your manufacturing process, and thus calculate the entire throughput from start to finish. So some pre-roll machines have 100 holes, the King Cone has 169, some other machines have numbers greater than that, maybe up to 300, but at the end of the day, loading the cones into the machine one by one takes the same amount of time, and then dumping the cannabis on top takes roughly the same amount of time. So then there is a little bit of efficiency in a larger machine, but the real bottleneck of the manufacturing process occurs later downstream. So if you're not able to cycle through each tray fast, by having a larger machine, you're actually gonna increase that bottleneck, which occurs later downstream, where someone's taking each of the cones out of the pre-roll machine, finishing them, and then putting it in their final packaging. So for example, let's say you had a pre-roll machine with 100 holes in the top and then one with 300. It's gonna take 3 times as long for someone to unload that tray of 300 pre-rolls and then process them than it is gonna be for the person that's doing 100 pre-rolls. If you have spare parts, that's great. Then you can immediately start running the next cycle of pre-rolls in the machine without hanging up the person who's still dealing with the finished pre-rolls from earlier in the process. At the end of the day, filling the pre-rolls into the machine is the easy part. And what's really the harder part is if you're being weight compliant, checking the weight on each of your pre-rolls, but then tamping the top, closing them either by a twist or a Dutch crown, and then putting it in your final packaging, labeling it, and then getting it ready for retail. So if you have a really big machine, but don't have the proper labor and manufacturing steps later downstream, it's actually better to have smaller machines and more spare parts so you continue to cycle through those runs and keep your manufacturing line optimized. So then another factor you're gonna wanna consider, is this a vibration-driven machine or is it motor-driven? So any sort of electronic pre-roll machine is gonna be better than a non-electronic ones. An example of a non-electronic pre-roll machine is gonna be called like a bump box, where you literally have to bump it up and down on a table to get it to pack. Once you've graduated past that step, you're gonna wanna have an electronic pre-roll machine, which is gonna do a lot more of the work for you and then be a lot more consistent. And then it's important to consider, is it a vibration-based packing system or is it a motor-driven packing system? So some pre-roll machines use vibration where others have a motor-driven platform. So the vibration is going to help move the material into the cone, but it's not going to pack it nice and dense into the bottom of the pre-roll. Whereas a motor-driven platform is actually bouncing up and down with a good amount of force, and that helps not only move the cannabis into the cone, but also pack it densely all the way from the bottom of the pre-roll up to the top. Lastly, you're going to want to consider what attachments or add-ons does a pre-roll machine have. A pre-roll machine with more attachments and add-ons is going to let you be more flexible and potentially increase the efficiency of your manufacturing process. For example, the king cone not only has the metering tray, which helps you get the right amount of flour into each cone, but also has tamping tools to help you tamp not only towards the bottom of the cone, but up towards the top, which makes the finishing step much faster. Additionally, the king cone is coming out with a folding attachment to help you fold the tops of all the pre-rolls at once and totally eliminate that next step of the pre-roll manufacturing process. You also want to think about what size the pre-roll machines can do and then how form-fitting the trays are. Some pre-roll machines can accept more than one cone size, but they don't necessarily have a tight tolerance around the cone, so a lot of flour is wasted going around it. You're gonna wanna look for a pre-roll tray that is tapered so the cone sits snugly into it and all the flour is directed into the cone. So when it comes time to scale your pre-roll manufacturing process, just like with the grinder or the sifter, you can purchase multiple smaller tabletop pre-roll machines and easily scale your manufacturing process. This is highly recommended to small and medium-sized businesses as it'll give you the most flexibility while still maintaining product quality. But at the end of the day, sometimes you need to expand far beyond what tabletop pre-roll machines will allow you to produce, or you need to cut your labor costs dramatically below what tabletop pre-roll machines will allow. So you have to upgrade to automated pre-roll machines. We recommend that once you're at 50 to 100,000 pre-rolls sold per month to start considering an automated pre-roll machine. If you're below this, there's definitely no need to incorporate automation into your pre-roll manufacturing process. There are some pros and cons of automation. For example, an automated pre-roll machine is really good at doing one thing. So if you're trying to do multiple sizes of cones per day and potentially multiple strains, an automated pre-roll machine is going to cause a lot of difficulty during your manufacturing process. Each time you have to shut down that machine to clean it or change size parts, you're losing machine efficiency. You're lowering the overall efficiency of that automated machine. Also, automated pre-roll machines are especially finicky and don't do well with really sticky and variable material. So if your company has a hard time grinding and sifting and then measuring your ground flour to a uniform level, it's going to be extremely difficult to get an automated machine to run seamlessly for 8 hours without a lot of human intervention. The companies that do the best job utilizing a fully automated pre-roll machine have really technical folks on staff and are also measuring both water activity and moisture content of the ground flour throughout the entire manufacturing process. In addition to the pre-roll manufacturing process, you might also want to bring in automation to increase your infused pre-roll manufacturing. So there's plenty of machines now to help you scale your infused pre-roll manufacturing process, one of which helps inject a rod of oil into the center of the pre-roll. And there's also technology now coming out to help paint the outside of the pre-roll and coat it in keef to now make this a much more scalable and less labor-intensive process. Additionally, if you're making and selling cannagars, there's now automated cannagar machines to help pack these at scale. So now let's get into what makes a good pre-roll. So the first and most important thing is, of course, the quality of your flour. If you're trying to create a top shelf pre-roll, you should be using full flour only. You don't have to use big buds. It's still okay to use B and C buds, but you're gonna wanna carefully grind those and remove any stems to ensure that this is a flavorful and high quality pre-roll. If you are looking to create a low budget, really economical pre-roll, that's okay. Just keep in mind what price point you're trying to sell this for and who is your customer. Then you're gonna wanna consider what's the moisture content of the flour within your pre-roll. By having too low of a moisture content, that means your flour is gonna be really dry and thus it's gonna burn much harsher than a flour with a nice moisture content. Typically on automated pre-roll machines, they can't handle flour that's too moist. An ideal range is about 10 to 14%, with anything with a greater moisture content being difficult for the machine to process, as it tends to be more sticky. The next variable you're gonna wanna consider is particle size, and then this all comes from the grinding and sifting process. Like I said before, by having too small of a particle size, that flour is gonna burn really hot and harsh. And by having a variable particle size, you do have the propensity to have canoeing happen in your pre-rolls. So you're gonna wanna have a nice uniform particle size distribution within your ground flour and ensure it's not too large or too small. The next key component is going to be the density of the pack. If your pre-roll is too densely packed, you're going to have very little airflow through the pre-roll and you're not going to be able to burn it or inhale through it. And likewise, if it's not dense enough of a pack, you're going to get a loose floppy filter end and the pre-roll is going to burn too fast and too harsh. It's important to get a uniform pack throughout the entire pre-roll. Otherwise, you might have a loose floppy filter end where once you start smoking the pre-roll, it starts sagging down. And this is usually due to a faulty pre-roll manufacturing process or machine where it's not driving the flower down into the bottom of the cone and getting a nice dense pack all the way at the bottom. So you get a soft spot down there and then it packs fine a little bit upwards and through the rest of the pre-roll. Related to the particle size and the grinding sifting is how much stem, leaf, and potentially even seed content is in your ground flower. Stem, leaves, and seeds are gonna have little to no potency, so it's not only gonna reduce the overall potency of your pre-roll, which is extremely important in the mind of the consumer, they're also gonna burn harsh and add negative flavors into the pre-roll. Of course, the paper or blunt type's important, and a lot of this comes down to personal preference. But between like papers, you're going to want to choose a manufacturer that has a higher quality rolling paper and can back this up with all the testing and documentation needed to prove the GSM, which ultimately conveys the thickness or thinness of the paper, as well as if there's heavy metals, pesticides, and microbials present within the rolling papers or blunt wraps. The filter type also plays a role into the flavor and overall smoking experience of the pre-roll. Of course, a paper filter tip is the standard, but if you're looking to create an elevated pre-roll experience and potentially release a premium infused product or a premium full flower pre-roll, you're gonna wanna use a glass, ceramic, or wood filter tip. These not only look cool and feel nice while you're smoking them, but they're also gonna reduce the heat and change the draw dynamics of the pre-roll, creating an overall better smoking experience. And then lastly, the packaging can play a huge role in the quality of the pre-roll in terms of keeping it airtight, which is gonna keep moisture in the flower, preventing it from drying out, and then keeping oxygen out, which will degrade the cannabis over time. Additionally, clear packaging that doesn't filter out light could leave your pre-roll prone to light degradation. At the end of the day, it's up to you to ensure that the retail stores that are selling your pre-rolls are moving through product. If you've shipped them out pre-rolls that are sitting on the shelves for 3 months or longer, it's probably a good idea to take those pre-rolls back in, maybe extract them or turn them into edibles, and make sure that the pre-rolls on the shelf are fresh, because that's the first impression your customers are gonna get to your brand. So those are the basics for manufacturing a high quality pre-roll. It all starts with the grind. It's extremely important to sift your flower for a multitude of reasons. And then the cone filling and pre-roll making process is not as easy as it sounds. So last year, pre-rolls were the fastest growing segment, not only in the US, but also in Canada, and they had the least amount of price compression compared to any other category. If you're currently making pre-rolls, this is evidence to double down. And if you're not currently making pre-rolls, you're really missing out on the fastest growing segment in the cannabis industry. Right now in the US, pre-rolls are the third biggest segment behind flower and vape pens, but in Canada, pre-rolls are the second biggest segment, just under flower, and is on trend to surpass flower later this year and become the #1 biggest segment within all of Canada. We think these trends will continue to play out in the US and internationally, as smoking is more popular on the East Coast than it is on the West Coast, where customers tend to be more health conscious. Additionally, if you look into Europe, you'll see there's a huge prevalence of smoking, especially with roll your own tobacco. So we think this audience is gonna be really keen to smoking pre-rolls, especially as the quality of pre-rolls continue to go up. So here at Custom Cones USA, we've partnered with Headset, the leading data company in the cannabis industry, to do a deep dive into the entire state of the pre-roll industry. We've done this for both the US and the Canadian market. So if you're curious to learn more, definitely visit our website at customconesusa.com. You could navigate down to the blog or hit the Knowledge Center button on the right-hand side of your screen and read the full report on either the US or Canadian market.